SH Figure Arts is a line that I've been fascinated with for a good while now. Recently, I've been eyeing figures such as Sabella, Izu version of 02, and most recently, SHF Majed, whose pre-order should be secured by the time I'm writing this. Yes, I'm still salty that Majed's pre-orders have been sold out on Shopee. Thank you for asking. It's a sign that I pretty much want to get back into collecting figures from this line again, even with the various B-Bandai fiascos. Hi, Valvarad. And although this line had started branching out into multiple different franchises such as Marvel, Dragon Ball, Digimon, and the like, I will always associate SHF with Kamen Rider, given that it was the franchise the line started out with. However, it's interesting to look back at the olden days of SHF, whether it be its early days as the successor to Sochaka Henshin, a toy line that defined Kamen Rider figures in the 2000s, which, fun fact, is where the SH and SH Figure Arts comes from, to before the Gaim SHF changed the joint system. The evolution of this line is fascinating. Currently, I only have two SHFs, one of which is the subject of today's video. Hello, and welcome to the Footerverse Project. And for my very first review for this YouTube channel, we'll be talking about a figure I have held onto for years and years at this point. SH Figure Arts, Kamen Rider Agito, Shining Form. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the figure itself, I just want to give you some proper context on our subject matter today, especially since you might not be familiar with Kamen Rider in general. You see, Shining Form is the final form of Kamen Rider Agito, which evolved from his super form, that being Burning Form. Despite what I just said earlier, Toei themselves don't actually use the term final form. They tend to use ultimate and strongest to what we refer to what we call final forms. And if it wasn't fairly obvious, this is a modified version of ground form, which you can tell from how the shoulders, torso, and legs look, but we'll get into more detail later. Without further ado, let's dive deeper into this figure. Now, there are two things you have to take into account when it comes to pre-Gaim SH Figure Arts: inconsistent scale and proportional jank. For reference, here he is next to the only other SHF that I have, Fa's Blaster Form. He is much shorter than Agito in terms of head height, owed to the aforementioned inconsistent scale, although this is pretty much standard for pre-Gaim SHFs. Also, part of the reason why it looks off in some poses largely has to do with the previously mentioned proportional jank, where his limbs are way too skinny compared to the original suit. This was a regular occurrence during the time it came out, and have been improving in the years since then. The figure itself, though, looks pretty good in spite of all this. I'm always drawn to the runic details about this figure and on the actual suit, though the interesting thing about this is the color that they've used. It's basically this pearl white color that gives off this knight in shining armor vibe, which is befitting of its namesake. And topping it all off is the nice shiny red that complements it so well. Granted, it has faded around the back due to age, or possibly some rubbing alcohol, or some fall damage. Who knows? Also, this may look familiar to you. Well, yes, as previously mentioned, this is a modified version of ground form. It's pretty obvious from how the whole thing is designed. You can tell because the shoulders and forearms are enhanced from ground form, have gained some extra additions onto those existing parts. It's pretty much one of those final forms that's more or less an enhanced version of the base form in terms of aesthetics. Other forms that come to my mind at least are Kabuto's Hyper Form, 02, though that one became its own separate writer, and Cross Saber. I could be wrong on this, but hey, you never know. Anyways, accessory time. Shining Form has a plethora of hands you could choose from. You have the closed fists already on the figure, relaxed palms which you can also use to replicate the Henshin pose, another set of open hands for the Rider Kick pose, and, strangely enough, two sets of holding hands. These are meant specifically for the main weapon of this form, the Shining Caliber in its twin mode. They're simple weapons accentuated by their luscious paint and the dynamic curves of the blade. It complements the form pretty well, even more so than Burning Form. His articulation is also pretty good for its time, and has held up significantly well, even with the Shinkocho Seiho version. Granted, it does use the drop-down hips instead of separate hip and thigh joints, but this was standard for the time, and it will do well enough. However, there's something you need to watch out for, if your copy is as old as mine at least. This is usually prominent once you pose him with the Shining Caliber, and it mainly has to do with the shoulders. These are on ball joints, so these can weigh down on the joints, but it is fixable should you have the means necessary to, well, fix it. As far as older SHFs go, Agito's Shining form has aged pretty well. It's not perfect, mind you, as if the wonky proportions wouldn't make you think otherwise. Though, unlike, say, Faw's Blaster, you can still have a fun time with this. The former is one that desperately needs a Shinkocho Seiho release, mostly to fix some of its issues, especially in regards to proportions, but I will be elaborating on that some other time. Even until now, I still have a soft spot for Shining form, despite its shortcomings. Maybe one day I could revisit Agito later down the line, probably with the Shinkocho Seiho, but that's going to be for later, and hope one day I could gain a much better appreciation for it. And now, it's time for some alternate recommendations. If you want an Agito figure that uses stuff found in more modern SHFs, well, look no further than the Shinkocho Seiho Agito. It improves on the previous Agito figures thanks to better proportions and articulation. And if you want Agito for an affordable price, I could think of at least one option. That being the Figurized Standard Agito. He is easily the least expensive in terms of Agito merch on the market right now. And this being a model kit means that you could customize it to your heart's content. I know I would. So, what do you think of Agito's Shining form? Is it something that you want in your collection, even with the Shinkocho Seiho Agito? Or are there other writers from Agito that you want to see get the SS treatment? Sound off in the comments. And, until next time, this has been the Photoverse Project.